I used to think Taco Bell was just another fast food joint. Sure, the hours sucked, the customers were weird, and the food was just greasy nonsense, but it paid the bills. My name's Mike, and I was working the night shift that day. It wasn't my first, and it sure as hell wouldn't be my last. I was used to the routine. Heat up the tacos, serve drunk guys, deal with stoners. Nothing too crazy, nothing too scary, just another night in a dead-end job. But that night, that was different. I remember him walking in like it was yesterday. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, with dirty blonde hair sticking out from under his hood. His hoodie was ripped at the sleeves, and his jeans had stains all over them. He looked like he hadn't showered in days, and his eyes, man, those eyes were off, empty, like he had seen too much. Maybe that's why he didn't seem like just another annoying customer. He had this weird aura around him, like he was here for something much more than a late-night snack. "Yo, what's up? I'll have a beef supreme crunch wrap, extra spicy." He didn't even look at the menu like he already knew exactly what he wanted. I was too tired to care, so I just punched it in and got to work. But as I started to assemble his order, he stared at me, dead in the eye, and I felt something shift. It wasn't like he was threatening me. He was just watching. "You ever wonder what's really in that meat?" he asked out of nowhere. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. I shrugged it off. "What are you talking about?" "Man, I'm talking about the beef." "You think it's really beef?" "It ain't," he said, his eyes narrowing. He leaned in a little closer, and I stepped back without realizing it. "What? You don't even know what you're serving to people. You think it's just fast food? Nah, there's something wrong here. Something dark." I chuckled nervously. "What, you trying to mess with me or something?" He shook his head, his face turning more serious. "You'll see. They're all gonna disappear. Every single one of you. And you'll never know why. But me? I know." I was about to brush him off, tell him to leave, but then he dropped a bomb on me. "I used to work here, man. I know what happens after hours, and I'm telling you, this place ain't what it seems." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I didn't know what he was on about, but something about it didn't sit right. Something more defying than a party cry in the ocean of liquor. Maybe it was the desperation in his eyes, or maybe it was just the fact that he sounded dead serious. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I wanted him out of my face. I handed him the crunch wrap. A little too fast, probably, but I didn't care. "Yeah, all right, man. You can take your damn food, just leave me out of it." He grabbed it and nodded, still looking me dead in the eyes. "You'll see, man, you'll see." And then, just like that, he walked out, leaving me standing there with a bad taste in my mouth. The next few days were a blur. But things started to get weird. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the place. Everything felt wrong. It was the way the employees started acting strange. Sarah, the cashier, was always looking over her shoulder like she was expecting someone to come after her. And Donnie, the cook, looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. They used to joke around, but now they didn't talk to anyone. They just did their job and kept their heads down. I thought I was just paranoid, but then things got darker. One night, I was taking out the trash when I saw a piece of paper pinned to the back bulletin board. It was hastily written, messy, like someone was trying to get something down in a hurry. It said, "Do not ask about the missing employees. Stay silent. Do not question it." I froze. My heart raced. This wasn't a joke, this was real. The next few shifts, I was on edge. Every time someone went missing, no one said anything. Sarah would just disappear for hours at a time, no one knowing where she went. Donnie started showing up late, then leaving early. It was like they were being swallowed by the darkness of the place, and I couldn't get Jason's words out of my head. I was working alone one night when I saw something that made my stomach turn. A taco, left behind on the counter, half eaten. But the meat? It was black. It wasn't the usual ground beef. It looked like something else. Stomach that shouldn't have been in food. I felt my stomach drop. My hands shook as I picked it up and stared at it, trying to make sense of it. But there was no making sense of it. Then I remembered Jason's warning. The meat, the missing employees, the weird vibes. It was all connected. A few nights later, I saw it. Josh, one of the guys I worked with, went missing. Just gone. No explanation. I thought maybe he left for the night, but then I checked the schedule, and he wasn't clocked out. No one said a word. It was like he never existed. I started feeling it then, the full weight of what Jason had said. This place wasn't just a fast food joint. It was a trap, a place where people disappeared, where dark things happened after hours and no one was supposed to question it. Then came the night I finally understood. I was in the back, checking some old stock when I heard voices, low whispers, almost like chanting. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. It led me to the kitchen where the lights flickered. There, standing by the stove, was Donnie, but he wasn't alone. There were bodies, not dead bodies, but something worse. People, employees, who had disappeared over the past weeks, were standing there, frozen, staring at the walls. Their eyes were wide open, but they didn't blink. They didn't move. Donnie turned around and his face was twisted, a grin that didn't belong on a human face. "You shouldn't have seen this, Mike. You should have just kept your mouth shut." I backed away slowly, my heart racing. What the hell is going on here? He stepped toward me, his smile growing wider. "You wanted to know the truth? You wanted to know what happens to the missing employees? They're part of the recipe now, Mike. Welcome to the family." I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, not looking back until I was out of the building, gasping for air. I didn't go back, not after that night. But I knew the truth now. Jason wasn't crazy. He was right all along. The meat wasn't beef. It was something else. And the people who disappeared? They became part of the recipe. The Taco Bell wasn't just a restaurant. It was a place where dark things happened, things that would make you wish you never asked. The story ends with Mike running away, but he knows he can never escape the truth of what he saw. Taco Bell wasn't just serving fast food, it was serving something much darker, something far more sinister, and Mike's life would never be the same again. The neon sign of Taco Fiesta flickered dimly in the quiet of the night. It was a small run-down location at the edge of town, barely noticed by the late-night crowd. But to Sam, the long shifts at the fast food joint felt like a curse. Every night he cleaned the counters, flipped tortillas, and handled orders with a numb sense of routine. A few more hours, he'd tell himself. A few more. Tonight, though, something was different. Sam wiped down the counter as Rachel, the night shift manager, hovered in the back. The restaurant was empty, save for the hum of the deep fryer and the soft clink of metal trays. The air felt thick, suffocating in the small space, and Sam couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Just as he was about to glance at the clock, the door chimed. A customer. Odd. Most people didn't show up this late for fast food unless they were drunk or desperate. The man who walked in was tall, with dark sunglasses and a weathered coat that didn't fit the hot summer night. Sam barely looked up as he approached the counter. "Yeah, what can I get you?" Sam asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. The man didn't answer right away. He just stared at Sam with a cold, unsettling gaze. When he finally spoke, it was with a smooth, almost rehearsed tone. "Just a taco," he said. "Soft shell and make it quick." Sam tried to brush off the weirdness. Customers came in all types, after all. But there was something about this guy's eyes. Something predatory. As he prepared the order, Sam glanced at the man again. His face was familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. There was something off, like a memory that was just out of reach. "I can't help but notice you've been here before," Sam said, trying to fill the silence. "Haven't seen you in a while, though." The man's lips curled into a smile, too wide, too slow. "You could say I've been busy." The way he said it sent a shiver down Sam's spine. He finished the taco and handed it to the man with a shaky hand. "Here you go," Sam said, his voice barely steady. "That'll be $2.50. The man took the taco without a word, paid with exact change, and left the counter. His presence lingered long after he was gone, like a shadow hanging in the room. Sam felt his pulse quicken, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. There was work to do. A few hours passed, and the quiet stillness of the restaurant began to gnaw at Sam's nerves. It was the dead of night, and Taco Fiesta was all but empty. Sam's mind kept drifting back to that man. He hadn't even caught his name. Rachel came out from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. "How's everything?" she asked, her voice tired but kind. Same old," Sam muttered. "I don't know, something about that guy earlier just didn't sit right." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The guy who came in for the taco," Sam said, glancing toward the door as if expecting him to walk back in. He looked like he knew something. Like he was just waiting for the right moment to... I don't know, it's hard to explain. Rachel chuckled, though there was a nervous edge to her laughter. "You're overthinking it. People are weird at this hour. Don't sweat it." But Sam couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up every time he glanced at the door. And then, just when he thought the night couldn't get any stranger, the bell above the door jingled again. It was him. The man was back. This time, he wasn't alone. Standing behind him was a woman. She looked familiar, though Sam couldn't place her either. She was wearing a heavy coat despite the heat, her eyes wild and unfocused. She stepped inside without a word, eyes darting nervously. The man didn't bother with pleasantries. "Where's the manager?" he asked, his voice colder than before. Rachel glanced at Sam, confusion and wariness flooding her face. "What do you want with me?" she asked, trying to sound calm, but Sam could hear the tremble in her voice. The man's eyes never left her. "You'll find out soon enough." The woman behind him flinched as though afraid to say anything. Her hands were shaking, clutching her purse like a shield. "Listen, I don't know what this is about," Rachel said, starting to step back, "but I'm not dealing with any more weirdness tonight." Sam could see the tension rising, and instinctively he moved closer to the counter, trying to assess the situation. "You don't understand, Rachel," the man said. his voice a low growl now. "It's too late for that." Rachel frowned, her expression confused, but Sam felt a sudden pang of fear in his chest. There was something wrong about this whole interaction, and he had the sinking feeling things were about to go horribly sideways. Before Rachel could respond, the man reached into his jacket. Sam's heart skipped a beat as he saw the flash of silver. The man pulled out a long, gleaming knife, too long for comfort. "I warned you," the man whispered. "You should have listened." Sam's blood ran cold. He reached for anything, a spatula, a pan, but before he could act, the man lunged. Rachel screamed, trying to step back, but the man was too quick. Everything happened in a blur. The woman screamed too, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of the struggle, the slap of flesh on tile, the frantic shuffling of feet. Sam grabbed the nearest thing he could, a tray, and threw it at the man, knocking him off balance just long enough for Rachel to scramble away. But it was too late. The man was on her, pinning her down, the knife flashing in the dim light. The woman, shaking, could only watch as the man hovered above Rachel, his face twisted with something dark and twisted. In the chaos, Sam managed to wrestle the man off of Rachel, but not without cost. The knife slashed across his arm as they tumbled to the ground. The man was stronger than he looked, his grip iron tight. "Get off of her!" Sam grunted, but the man's grip was unrelenting. Just as he thought it was over, the woman rushed forward, slamming her purse into the man's head with a cry of desperation. The man stumbled, and Sam seized the opportunity, grabbing the knife and pushing it into the man's chest with everything he had. The police arrived just minutes after the fight ended, but the damage was already done. Sam sat on the curb outside, shaking, covered in blood, his mind racing. The ambulance had taken Rachel to the hospital. She was lucky to be alive. But Sam knew things weren't over. Detective Carter approached, her face tight with concern. "You all right, Rivera?" she asked, glancing at the scene with a sharp eye. "I don't know," Sam muttered, staring at the ground. "I never thought it would go this far. It was just supposed to be a normal night." Carter nodded slowly. "We're still piecing together the details, but the man, his name was Dean Walker. He was a serial killer who's been on our radar for months. We believe he was targeting Rachel, and maybe you too." Sam's head spun. "What? Why?" Seems like he'd been watching her for a while. He was planning to kill her, but something went wrong. Something triggered him to act tonight. Maybe it was you. Or maybe he just snapped. Sam couldn't believe it. The unease that had settled in his gut when the man first walked in. It hadn't been paranoia. It had been the beginning of a nightmare he hadn't seen coming. "What about the woman?" Sam asked, his voice hollow. She just stood there. "She's in custody," Carter said, her tone grim. "Her name is Sarah. She was his accomplice, maybe a victim herself. We're still figuring out the connection. But one thing's for sure, this was no random act." As the investigation continued, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that the horror wasn't over. He had survived, but at what cost? And as the police began to close the case, Sam realized the worst part of all. There was still one more question lingering in the air. Who else had Dean Walker been watching? It was a quiet Tuesday night when I pulled up to the Taco Bell on the edge of town. Small towns don't have much to offer after dark. Barely a car on the road, the occasional drunk stumbling out of a bar, and the hushed whispers of a place that never seemed to move past its prime. That's why I didn't think twice when I parked and walked in. The neon sign buzzed above me. It was flickering, struggling to stay on. Just like the place itself. I could smell the familiar fast food scent, tacos, beef, and grease. But something in the air felt wrong. My gut told me to turn around, but I ignored it. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The familiar layout, the rows of tables, the yellow lighting, it all seemed the same. But the people, those weren't the same faces I was used to. There was an old man behind the counter who barely looked up when I entered. He wasn't the usual guy with the sarcastic smile and quick jokes. This man, his eyes were dead, hollow like he hadn't seen the outside world in years. "Hey," I called, forcing a smile. "What's good tonight?" He grunted, looking me up and down like he couldn't care less. "Same as always. Yeah, what do you want?" I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I was about to order a cheesy gordita crunch when I noticed him. A figure in the corner by the condiment station. A guy in a hoodie sitting still, head down. His posture was stiff, unnatural. He didn't even glance up when I entered. It felt like his presence was suffocating the air. I didn't want to make a scene, so I just nodded, grabbed my food, and sat in the corner, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. But no matter how hard I tried, my eyes kept darting back to the guy. He hadn't moved. Not once. "Yo, you good?" I called out to him, though I didn't expect a response. But I needed to break the tension. Nothing. Just silence. The old man behind the counter let out a sigh, low and guttural. "Don't mind him, he's been coming here for weeks." Stays in the corner, doesn't say a word, just sits there. I frowned, thinking about leaving. I wasn't one to stick around in uncomfortable situations, but something kept me there. Maybe it was the food, maybe it was the weird energy in the air, but I felt like I needed to stay. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Not the usual dull flicker, but a full-on blink, like the whole place was struggling to stay alive. Everything went dark for a split second, long enough to make my stomach twist in unease. The sound of the fridge humming in the back went silent. When the lights came back on, the guy in the hoodie was standing right next to me. I almost choked on my drink, a cold shiver running up my spine. His face was pale, his eyes too wide, like he hadn't blinked in days. He was breathing heavily and his mouth was twitching, like he was about to speak, but nothing came out. Jesus, man, what the hell? I backed up, almost knocking my chair over, but he didn't flinch. He didn't move at all. It was like he was waiting for something. The air in the restaurant was suddenly freezing, and I could see my breath in front of me. This wasn't normal, not in a Taco Bell. I stood up, ready to bolt, when I heard the old man speak again, his voice shaking. "You shouldn't be here," he said, looking past me, his face pale. "It's too late." I laughed it off, but my heart was pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about? What's wrong with this place?" He glanced over at the guy in the hoodie, then back at me. "That bell," he whispered, "it rings. And it calls. It calls things that shouldn't be here." I stared at him, thinking he was just some crazy old man trying to mess with me. But then the bell above the door rang. It wasn't the usual chime. This was different, louder, haunting. It made the hairs on my neck stand up, and I froze. The door swung open by itself. No one was there. "That's the first warning," the old man muttered. "The second comes when the bell rings again. That's when it's too late." I couldn't breathe. A cold wave washed over me, and I turned to run. But that's when I saw it. The figure in the back of the restaurant. The one I thought I'd only imagined. It wasn't a person at all. It was tall, unnaturally so, its body hunched. Its face was a mess of twisted skin and hollow eyes. It wasn't even human anymore. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The bell rang again, louder this time, shaking the walls. The thing in the back moved, slowly, almost like it was savoring my fear. Its mouth opened, stretching wider than should be possible, a black void inside. "Last meal at the Bell," it whispered, its voice scraping against my mind, leaving a trail of cold terror. The guy in the hoodie stepped closer, his eyes fixed on me. "You should have listened," he murmured, a sad smile crossing his lips. "Now you're part of the menu." I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor, my body frozen in place. The figure in the back took a step forward, and in that moment, I knew there was no escape. The old man at the counter finally stood up, his voice barely a whisper. "It's always the last meal," he said. "But the bell, it doesn't stop ringing. It never stops." I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the cold, thick air. My legs wouldn't move, my body frozen in place like I was paralyzed. The thing in the back of the restaurant was getting closer. Its steps slow but deliberate, as though it knew it had all the time in the world. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, every beat, every sound, thudding against my chest like it was trying to escape. The bell rang again, its sound vibrating through my bones. It wasn't just a bell anymore. It felt like the building itself was alive, like the bell was a heartbeat, and every time it rang, it grew stronger, closer to something far worse. The thing reached out with long, bony fingers, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes, if you could even call them eyes, were deep black pits, voids that seemed to pull in every light around them. I couldn't tear my gaze away from them, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to look away. "You're not leaving," the guy in the hoodie whispered, his voice almost a rasp now. He was standing beside me, his face twitching unnaturally, like he was trapped in some sort of nightmare too. "The bell doesn't let anyone leave." The figure in the back stopped just in front of me. It towered over me, its breath ragged, a foul stench filling the air. I could feel it closing in on me, the darkness around it swallowing everything. My mind was screaming for me to move, to run, but I couldn't. "You were supposed to leave," the old man behind the counter muttered, his voice shaking. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes were fixed on the thing in the back. But once it calls, it never lets go. The thing opened its mouth, its jaw unhinging like a snake's, and I could hear the faintest whisper of words, though they were distorted and low. They were speaking to me, but it didn't sound like anything human. I couldn't understand it, but I felt the words crawling inside my mind, like they were trying to rewrite me from the inside out. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. I could hear the bell ringing again. It was too loud now, too overwhelming. It was the sound of death, of finality, a sound that told me there was no way out. And then, as the thing reached out toward me, I heard the door swing open. The bell stopped. Silence. I opened my eyes. The place was empty. I was standing alone in the restaurant, the lights flickering again, the coldness gone. The old man was gone. The guy in the hoodie was gone. The thing was gone. I was alone, but something had changed. I could feel it. The bell still hung there, silent now. But it wasn't just a bell. It was a reminder, a warning. I walked toward the door, trembling, but as I reached for the handle, I heard it. A faint, hollow sound, like something scratching against the walls. Something inside. Something waiting. And then the bell rang once more. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap in the face. But I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel free, because I knew as I looked back at the Taco Bell that the bell wasn't done with me. It would call again. It always did. It's 12 a.m. and most people are already home wrapped up in their beds asleep. But not me. I'm stuck here standing behind the counter at a Taco Bell in Clarksville, Tennessee, working the graveyard shift. You know the hours. No one talks about the ones where everything's quiet, and you start wondering if you're the only one awake in the world. And let me tell you, it gets real weird. I'm Jake Dawson, 28 years old, 6 feet tall, with a look that probably says I'm a guy you wouldn't want to cross paths with. Thick scruff on my chin, a couple of tattoos peeking out from under my sleeves, and a permanent scowl that I've perfected over the years. Yeah, I guess I look like the kind of guy you'd keep your distance from. But tonight's different. Tonight I know I'm not alone in this place. There's something off. It's been dead for the last hour or so. The usual couple of late-night drunks stumble in for their midnight cravings, but tonight's been too quiet. I'm not complaining. When you work shifts like these, quiet means you're doing your job right. But I can't shake the feeling that something's coming. Something bad. "Jake, you good?" Sarah asks from the grill. She's new here, just a couple of weeks on the job. Tall, slender, and a little on edge. I can tell she's still trying to figure out the rhythm of this place. I look over at her, trying to hide the unease creeping up in my gut. "Yeah, just another night," I lie. But it's not just another night. No, tonight, something's coming. And I can feel it in the air. 12:15 a.m. There's this beat-up old sedan sitting in the parking lot. It's been there for a while now, way longer than the usual drive-through crowd sticks around. I can't even see the driver through the windows. It's just parked, facing the building, and something about it feels wrong. I don't know why, but I can't stop staring at it. "Jake?" Sarah calls out again, but I'm not really listening. I'm still fixated on the car, my gut tightening. "Yeah?" I finally snap out of it and turn to her. "That guy? The one who just left?" She looks confused, maybe even a little scared. "He's back, in the parking lot." I blink, trying to figure out what she means. Then I glance through the window. There he is, a man standing by the door, tall, hoodie pulled up, his face shadowed, almost like he's trying to hide from the world. He's just standing there, doing nothing. I watch him for a second too long before realizing it's freaking me out. "Yeah, he's been coming in here for weeks," I finally say, trying to play it cool. Same order every time, nothing to worry about. But as I say it, I know I'm not convincing anyone, especially myself. 12:30 a.m. I try to shake it off. I've dealt with creepy customers before, but this guy? He's different. He doesn't say much, doesn't make eye contact. He just orders, pays, and leaves. And that's exactly what he does tonight. Just orders 2 tacos, a Baja Blast, and a small fry. But it's the way he orders them. So calm, so robotic. I grab the order and turn around to hand it over, but when I look back, the man's already out the door. He's standing outside, staring at the building like he's waiting for something. Or maybe someone. "You sure you're okay, Jake?" Sarah asks, peeking over my shoulder. I force a smile, but I know she can sense it. She's not dumb. "Yeah, just keep your head down. We've got work to do." But I can't shake the feeling that tonight's going to end differently. Something about this guy, he doesn't feel right. 12:45 a.m. I'm cleaning the counter when I hear the bell. It's the loud jingle of the door, but this time it doesn't stop. It rings again and again. like someone's forcing the door open and closed just to mess with us. I look up. The guy's back. He's standing by the counter, his head down, hoodie still up, like he's trying to blend into the background. I can't even see his face this time, but I feel his eyes on me, like he's watching me from under that damn hood. And then, without saying a word, he steps forward and places his hand on the counter. "I'll take 2 tacos," he says, his voice low, almost raspy. I freeze for a second. Something in his tone, something about his presence, feels wrong. I try to push the thought away. He's just a customer, right? I grab the order again and hand it over. He doesn't leave, though. Not immediately. Instead, he stands there, still and silent, staring at me. "You good?" I ask, trying to break the tension. He doesn't answer. He just turns and walks outside, not even looking at me anymore. But then something weird happens. He stops in the parking lot, the same spot he was in before, just standing there. I feel my heart rate pick up. Why the hell is he still here? "Call the cops," I whisper to Sarah, the words slipping out before I can stop them. But before she can grab the phone, the man turns, slowly, deliberately, and then he locks eyes with me, and I swear to God, there's nothing behind them, just empty, hollow pits like a black void. It chills me to the bone. I can't move. I can't speak. The air around us feels thick, like something's coming. 1 a.m., I can't look away. The man's eyes are locked onto mine like he's trying to read every thought I have. It feels like I'm suffocating. The air around me thick and heavy. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He's not just some weirdo, it's something more. I can feel it. "Jake," Sarah says, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do? My brain's working overtime trying to make sense of this. The guy's standing there in the same spot, not moving a muscle." I can't focus on anything else. I grab my phone from the counter and call 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asks, her voice calm, but I can hear the anxiety behind it. "There's a guy. He's been hanging around the Taco Bell for the last hour acting weird. He's not leaving, just staring at the building. I think he's up to something." My voice shakes, but I can't help it. "Sir, can you stay on the line? I'll send a unit to your location." I end the call and look at Sarah. "The cops are on their way. Just keep an eye on him." She nods, visibly shaken but trying to hold it together. I keep my eyes on the man. He's still out there, standing like a damn statue. His posture's tense, but there's no sign of movement, no sign of him leaving, no sign of him doing anything. It's like he's waiting for something, or someone. 1:15 a.m. The minutes drag by like hours. My eyes flick back and forth between the man in the parking lot and the door, praying for the cops to show up. Then, just as I think I can't take it anymore, something happens. The man moves, slowly, like he's dragging himself across the parking lot. But he's not walking toward the door. He's walking toward the far corner of the lot, where the shadows are darkest. That's when I see it. Behind him, a dark shape emerges from the shadows. At first, I think it's just a trick of the light, but then it moves closer. It's another figure, tall and gaunt, wearing a long coat that drags on the ground, and it's following the first man. My heart stops. "Sarah," I hiss, my voice barely audible. "Did you see that?" She looks over, and I can see the terror spread across her face. "Oh my God," she breathes. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know." "I don't want to know." 1:20 a.m. The door bursts open, and two officers rush in. Officer Daniels and Officer Ross, both wearing uniforms and looking like they've seen their share of strange things. They're quick, confident, moving with purpose. "What's going on?" Officer Daniels asks, his eyes scanning the room. "That guy, the one outside?" I start, pointing to the parking lot. "He's been out there for over an hour. There's something wrong with him." They exchange a quick glance and then look outside, following my line of sight. "Stay here," Officer Ross says, moving toward the door. But before they can make it outside, the man starts walking toward the door. The other figure is still trailing behind him. I feel a chill spread through the room. "Stay back," I warn, but the officers ignore me, stepping outside to confront the man. For a few seconds, everything's silent. I watch, my heart racing as the two officers approach him. They shout something at him, but the man doesn't respond. Not even a flinch. And then, without warning, he turns around, his face finally visible, and when I see it, I feel my stomach drop. His skin is pale, almost ghostly white, and his eyes, those empty black pits I saw earlier, are still there, are wide open, unblinking. His mouth is twisted into an unsettling grin, like he knows something we don't. "Hey!" Officer Ross shouts again. "Stop right there!" But the man doesn't listen. He just raises his hand slowly, pointing toward the officers. The air around us seems to shift, and for a moment I can't breathe. It's like the world is holding its breath. The officers freeze, their movements slow, like they're no longer in control of their own bodies. It's like the man's presence is pulling them into his trance. Then the second figure steps into view, and I realize this isn't a coincidence. The second figure is wearing the same expression as the man. Its eyes are just as empty, just as hollow. They're not human. "Jake," Sarah says urgently, her voice shaking, "we need to get out of here." I look back toward the officers, frozen, lifeless. Then I glance back at the figures. The second one steps forward, and that's when I feel it, an unnatural cold creeping through the air. It's like the temperature drops, like we're in the middle of a storm that hasn't hit yet. Suddenly, the first figure, like he's being controlled by something unseen, raises his arm to the sky. His fingers stretch out as if reaching for something far beyond the parking lot. And then a loud, ear-splitting screech rips through the night. 1:30 a.m. I turn around, my heart racing. From the shadows, something massive emerges. A third figure, taller than the others. Its body is elongated, with limbs that seem to stretch unnaturally long, and its eyes, pale, glowing white, pierce through the darkness. It's like looking at a nightmare come to life. The figure doesn't walk toward the officers. It floats, gliding just above the ground, its movements inhuman, unnerving. The other two figures don't move. It's like they're all connected by something far beyond my understanding. Something dark, ancient. Then the third figure raises its hand, and I hear a faint whisper in the air. I can't make out the words, but they sound like an incantation, a chant. And that's when I realize this isn't just a random attack. This is something planned, something deliberate. The officers start to stumble toward the door, but they're not themselves. They've become shadows of their former selves, their movements slow and stiff, like they're trapped inside their own bodies. I want to run. I need to run. But I can't move. I'm rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the terror creeping over me. 1:35 a.m. The third figure steps closer, and I see something that sends a wave of dread through me. It's wearing a mask, an old, cracked face twisted with pain like it's been molded from clay and left to decay. The figure looks directly at me, its hollow eyes burning through me. Then, just as quickly as they came, the figures vanish into the night, leaving nothing but an unsettling silence. The parking lot is still, deadly still. I stand there, my breath heavy, heart hammering in my chest. The officers are gone, vanished like the figures. There's no sign of them. I take a step back, but I feel something in the air, something lingering, following me. And I know deep down that whatever those things were, they're not finished with me yet. 1:40 a.m. I'm out the door in a heartbeat, dragging Sarah with me, not even looking back. But the shadows are still there. Watching, waiting, I can feel their eyes on me as we leave, and I know it's not over, not by a long shot. It gets better. The chill of the night had wrapped itself tightly around everything. The air was sharp and biting, a winter's reminder that the year was drawing to a close. The dim yellow lights of the Taco Bell parking lot flickered uncertainly, casting long shadows across the half-empty lot. The few cars that remained stood like silent sentinels, abandoned for the night. Inside the restaurant, the buzz of late-night fast food chatter had died down, replaced by a suffocating stillness. Rhea glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past midnight. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, her grip tightening as she tried to calm her nerves. She had hoped this trip would be quick, just a quick bite to eat before they hit the road again. But now, as she sat there in the car, watching her kids finish their meals, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her 10-year-old daughter, Maya, had already finished her food and was now fiddling with her seatbelt, her small hands pulling at it absent-mindedly. Aiden, her 14-year-old son, was the opposite. He sat in the booth, eyes glued to his phone, only lifting his head when he heard her voice. "You all right, Mom?" Aiden asked, glancing up at her. Rhea swallowed, trying to smile. "Yeah, just tired. You two good?" "Yeah, we're fine," Aiden said dismissively, tapping away on his screen. Rhea wasn't sure what it was, but something felt off. It wasn't just the late hour or the exhaustion from the long drive. It was something deeper, a gnawing sensation she couldn't shake. As she adjusted Maya's seatbelt again, she noticed someone walk in. He was tall, wearing a black hoodie that obscured most of his face. The hood pulled up tight against the cold. His stride was unnervingly focused, like he knew exactly where he was going. There was something about the way he moved that set Rhea's teeth on edge. She leaned forward slightly, watching him. He took a seat in the far corner booth, his back turned to the rest of the room. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. But for some reason, Rhea couldn't take her eyes off him. Her heart began to beat a little faster, and a cold sweat started to form on her palms. "Mom?" Aiden's voice cut through her thoughts. She blinked, startled. "Yeah? You keep looking at that guy. What's up with that?" Rhea shook her head, her throat tightening. "Nothing. Just weird vibes tonight, that's all." Aiden didn't seem convinced, but he went back to his phone, clearly uninterested in her concerns. Rhea, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She hadn't seen him yet, but she recognized him all the same. The man in the corner booth was Victor, a shadow from her past, someone she never expected to see again. Victor. Her chest tightened. She hadn't thought about him in years. hadn't even remembered what his voice sounded like, what his eyes looked like. But as he sat there, barely noticeable to anyone else in the restaurant, her body reacted instinctively. She felt her breath catch in her throat. His presence, cold and ominous, was like a warning bell. She couldn't ignore memories she'd buried deep were suddenly rising to the surface. "You need to finish up, Aiden," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Aiden shot her a curious glance, but didn't respond. He was too wrapped up in his phone. Victor didn't move. He didn't even glance in their direction at first, but then, just as Rhea started to look away, his head turned, and his eyes locked with hers. Her heart stopped. It was him. Rhea's hands clenched, the tremor she was trying to control now visible. Victor's gaze bore into her, as if the years hadn't passed, as if he was still the same man who had haunted her every step, every choice she'd made. Aiden looked up again. "Mom, are you sure you're all right?" Rhea's gaze never wavered from Victor. "Get your sister. We're leaving." Aiden frowned, but stood up and walked over to Maya. She had already gotten out of her seat, heading toward the door. As Rhea turned to grab her things, her breath caught in her throat. Victor had moved. He was standing now, his figure looming in the dim light. He hadn't broken eye contact. "Mom, let's go." Aiden's voice broke her trance. Rhea didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were locked on Victor, who was now making his way toward the door, like a predator moving toward its prey. Then, before she knew it, he was standing directly in front of them. "Long time no see, Rhea." Victor's voice was low and rough, like he had been waiting for this moment. Rhea's stomach turned. She could feel the heat of panic rising in her chest. "What the hell do you want, Victor?" Her voice was shaky, but she refused to show fear. Victor smiled darkly. "What do I want? You're asking me that?" He chuckled, stepping closer. "You think you can just walk away from everything you've done?" Rhea stood up quickly, positioning herself between Victor and her children. "You need to leave. Now," she ordered, her voice firm, though the fear was bubbling under the surface. Victor stepped forward, his smile fading. "Leave?" he repeated. "I don't think I'm going anywhere. Not this time." Before she could react, he grabbed Aiden by the arm, yanking him backward. "Aiden!" Rhea screamed, her heart pounding in her chest. Aiden yelped in shock, his phone falling from his hands as he was dragged toward the door. "Get off him!" Rhea shouted, her voice desperate. The few remaining customers in the restaurant were frozen, too scared or too stunned to help. Rhea's mind raced. She couldn't let him take Aiden. She couldn't let him win again. But Victor was already outside, pulling Aiden into the darkness. Rhea didn't think, didn't hesitate. She ran, adrenaline fueling her every step. Rhea's breath came out in sharp gasps as she reached the door. The cold hit her immediately, a harsh reminder of the night around her. The parking lot was eerily empty, the only sound the distant hum of the streetlights. And then, the unmistakable roar of an engine starting up, Victor's black van. Her heart hammered in her chest as she turned, sprinting toward her car. "Aiden!" she screamed into the night, but there was no reply, only the screech of tires as the van tore away into the dark streets. Rhea's hands shook as she fumbled for her keys. Her mind raced through every possible scenario, but none of them felt right. She couldn't let Victor get away again, not after everything. She slammed her car door and tore out of the parking lot. the van already disappearing into the darkness ahead of her. The world felt like it was moving in slow motion, the shadows along the road stretching longer with each passing second. 20 minutes later, Rhea was speeding down the highway, her knuckles white from gripping the wheel. The city lights had long disappeared behind her, replaced by the cold darkness of the outskirts. She glanced at her phone as it buzzed in her pocket, her breath catching. Unknown caller. Without hesitation, she answered. "Aiden, is that you?" The voice on the other end wasn't Aiden. Rhea ... It was Victor. His voice, smooth and cold. "I have your son. I told you this would happen. You can't outrun your past." Rhea's stomach twisted in fear. "You want him back?" "You'll have to make a choice," Victor continued, the amusement in his voice clear. "I'm at the old warehouse on 5th. Come alone, or Aiden doesn't make it." The line went dead. Her blood ran cold. Alone. The word echoed in her mind. She had no choice. She turned the wheel sharply, heading straight for the warehouse district. The old warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted gates barely hanging on their hinges. The place was as desolate as she remembered it, a place full of echoes and ghosts from her past. The smell of stale air and old oil mixing with the cold, damp atmosphere. She stepped further inside, her breath shallow. "Hana!" Rhea ... Victor's voice came from the darkness and Rhea froze. From the shadows he appeared, a dark figure in the dim light, holding Aiden by the collar, her heart twisted at the sight of her son, his face pale with fear. "Let him go," Rhea's voice broke, panic rising in her chest. Victor's smile was twisted, cruel. "You think you can talk your way out of this, after everything?" He shoved Aiden to the ground, the boy scrambling to his feet. Aiden's voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, please." Rhea's heart shattered, but she couldn't show weakness. "Not now, not when it mattered most. I'm not leaving without him," she said, her voice shaking with rage. Victor's smirk faded as he grabbed a gun from his jacket and shoved it into her hands. "Choose," he said. "Do you shoot me? Or do you watch Rhea's hands tremble as she held the cold metal of the gun in her grip?" The weight of it felt unbearable. Every ounce of her being screamed to drop it, to run, to find another way. But there was no other choice. Victor's eyes gleamed in the low light as he waited for her to make a move. His smug expression was a stark contrast to the fear in Aiden's eyes, the boy barely able to stand. Rhea's heart ached, but her resolve was growing stronger. She wasn't going to let Victor win, not after everything he had done. "You know what's at stake, Rhea?" Victor said, his voice dripping with malice. "This is your chance. If you want him back, you know what you have to do." Her fingers tightened around the trigger, but she couldn't make herself pull it. She couldn't shoot him, could she? Victor saw the hesitation in her eyes and grinned wider, stepping closer. "You don't have the guts, do you? After everything, you're still too weak to do what needs to be done." Rhea swallowed hard, the voice inside her mind screaming at her to act. Aiden, her son, was on the ground looking up at her with pleading eyes. She couldn't let him suffer. She had to do this. Her eyes never left Aiden as she lifted the gun and aimed it at Victor. "Mom, no!" Aiden shouted, but Rhea silenced him with a sharp look. "Stay back, Aiden. I'm doing this for you." Victor took another step forward, his grin never fading. He was too confident, too sure of himself. But that was his mistake. He thought he had her cornered, but Rhea wasn't going to let him control her anymore. With a sudden motion, She spun on her heel, swinging the gun at the wall beside her. The shot rang out, loud and sharp in the empty space of the warehouse.